Okay, hey, what's going on? Duncan Lee back again with another edition of the Let's Ride video series. Thanks for checking it out. As I mentioned before, it is always avalanche safety and awareness time. It's not a month thing, it's not a week thing, it's an all the time thing. With winter approaching quickly, it's mid-December. There's a little bit of snow on the ground in certain places, but not enough yet except for north of the border, so those guys are shredding, and hopefully they're all playing safe and being smart. Part of that is your preseason prep. So in this episode, we're going to talk about Get the Forecast. It's the third step in the Know Before You Go awareness messaging from the Utah Avalanche Center. So Get the Forecast. You know, we all talk about weather forecasts. We talk about avalanche forecasts and advisories. What is Get the Forecast all about? This is something that you kind of do all year or all season. I watch the weather like a hawk, actually. It helps me plan where I'm going to go, when I'm going to go, and where the good snow is. I also watch the Avalanche Advisory put out by the various avalanche centers, especially the places that I'm going to go to, and I actually watch those all season so I know what's going on in the snowpack. It gives you a great idea of what's happening underneath the snow. That way, if there is a weak layer or there's a bunch of avalanches happening on a specific layer, you know what you're looking for when you get out there so you can do some hunting. But that'll come next when we're getting the picture. So in getting the forecast, first step, let's just talk about the weather forecast. You can go to weather.gov or NOAA, or there's a whole bunch of different apps. I like to use radar apps. Everybody has their own little weather geek place to go. Open Snow is a fun one to read. There's a bunch of different blogs and a ton of information out there nowadays. But it helps you understand how to prep for your ride, what to pack, what to bring with you, how long you might stay out for, and what to plan for if it all goes wrong. It's also going to let you know what the storm did, what the snow is going to be like, and what you're going to expect for the hours to come. So no matter where you get your weather data, make sure you make mental note of it at least, or jot it down in a field book. One of the cool things about taking an area avalanche class is that you get a field book to actually note the stuff and keep a log of the weather forecasts and the avalanche advisories before you go out, so you have it written down, you have the data. No matter where you're getting your forecast and your weather outlooks, just make sure that you're paying attention, because it's going to give you some vital information about what the snow's doing and what to bring for your ride. So after you get the weather, there's a couple questions that you want to ask yourself with the weather. What was the weather doing during the storm last night? That's going to tell you, how did the snow fall? What's the snow like? What were the temperatures? How windy was it? Is there going to be a wind slab out there? Or is the snow just going to suck because it got scoured off the western slope? How did it change the snowpack? So how did the weather affect the snow on the ground if it wasn't snowing? Did it freeze? Did it melt? Again, was it super windy? What is the weather forecast where we're going? So again, how are we going to plan for our ride? How are we going to plan for the day? And how will the weather affect the snowpack and our ride? Pretty important things. If the snowpack changes while you're out riding, it might be different than when you went in. So if you're crossing some avalanche terrain to get into the riding zone that you're looking for that day, and the weather changes the avalanche danger, well, that's something pretty important that you're going to need to know. That way, when you're on your way out, things aren't drastically different and then you're in harm's way. So checking the weather is a pretty vital aspect of having a safe ride. Okay, so after checking the weather, you gotta check the avalanche advisory. Most places that we ride have them, and they're in the United States. They're put out by different avalanche centers in each state. Now, the way that works is there's a bunch of observers that submit observations or are paid to gather observations. And then there's forecasters that take those observations, they look at the weather that's coming in, see what the snowpack on the ground is doing, and see how the weather is going to change the snowpack, and then they print out an advisory. The advisory consists of a few different things, like an overall danger rating, a specific avalanche type or types if there's more than one, locations of these avalanches, likelihood of the avalanches, and a size. And then they'll also include a description of what's going on. So it's important to look at the advisory, but don't just look at the danger rating. You've got to get in there and dig into the details. Find out what the avalanche problem is or the character, because there's specifics to that problem that you're dealing with that day and where it might live or how it is created, and some very specific ways to how it could be triggered and where it could be triggered from. Then the aspect and elevation, really dialing in where it might be living and the likelihood, certain down to unlikely. It says it right here on the advisory. So that's giving you an idea of how touchy it might be. And then the size. Small avalanches are still big enough to kill a person. So that puts the spidey senses and the hair on the back of my neck up. But then historic avalanches could take out villages. So, it gives you an idea of what to expect. Now, things are different once you get out there, and we'll talk about that again in the next step, which is get the picture. But for now, it's important to read the advisory so you have an idea or a base idea of what's going to happen out on your ride and what to look for, so you can go hunting to find the problem and not be exposed to it. So there's a blurb underneath the different avalanche problems for the day, and it's a paragraph form. It's important to dig in there and really read it all, because it can talk about some very specific details that you might need to make your ride safer. Again, area avalanche training gives you a way to write it down. Other curriculums like Sierra Avalanche Center, you can get a blank field book to write all this stuff down, but basically it's important. If you write it down, then you're making mental note, and then you can carry it with you on your ride. That way there's no questioning what it is you might be looking for, especially in those higher danger rating days or specific problems that you don't have a lot of experience with. So after digging through there, again, formal avalanche education helps you understand the jargon and the descriptions and the specifics of all these avalanche types, problems, danger ratings, and all the goods in the advisory. So it's important to really get in there and figure out what's going on. So observers for the avalanche advisory, they're out there digging pits, taking notes, making observations, getting it to the forecasters. The forecasters then turn around and create the advisory for the public. There's no way they go to every single spot that you're going to ride, and gladfully not, because then there's fresh powder rip up, right? But it's important for you to take the information, get a good idea of what's going on out there, and then go out into the terrain or go on your ride and have a good time, but also keep your head on a swivel. Situational awareness is huge, so you need to pay attention out there, find out what's going on, take the information of getting the avalanche advisory and the weather forecast, and then applying it to your ride and finding out if it's spot on or if they missed something. And then it's important for you to gather observations while you're riding and then turn around and submit them back to the Avalanche Center. Every center has a way that you could submit observations, and it's a pretty vital part of what's going on. I like to scroll through the observations because that gives me a boots on the ground perspective of what's going on out there, what other people are seeing, and how it's affecting their day. Were they surprised by an avalanche, or did they expect it to happen? Was it what the advisory was talking about, or something different that they didn't even think would be out there? So it's very important for us to contribute back to the avalanche advisory by submitting observations. That's about it on getting the forecast. Like I said, weather forecasts, all the different apps that you can get into, and then the avalanche advisory. Jotting it down and having notes on it is pretty big, because then you can go out for your ride and come home safe after every time. So thanks for tuning in, and once again, I'm just so stoked for winter. Let's check out some epic riding footage. Have a good one.